Hello everyone, this week I want to show you a few locations in New York City, but the focus will be on one particular person, that of George Washington, and New York City being the first capital of the United States. Of course, to be technical, we are talking about after the American Revolution and the 13 colonies gaining their independence, because during the American Revolution itself, to talk about a capital is a tricky thing as it was kind of a moving target with many cities playing an important role, like Philadelphia or the city of York. However, the position of a president began in 1789 with George Washington, and New York City was the first capital for the president and his cabinet. So the question is, where did the President of the United States stay while in New York City? I will show you. So let's begin our trip in Union Square Park on 14th Street, and then make our way down to the tip of the island, saving the best part for last. So why Union Square Park, you ask? Well, it's here that we have a statue of George Washington riding on his horse, reclaiming the city of New York from the British at the end of the American Revolution. The statue was completed in 1856, which means it is one of the oldest sculptures that you will be able to see on the streets of New York City. It was the work of Henry Kirk Brown, who, by the way, also did the statue of Abraham Lincoln, which stands on the other side of the park. And maybe I am reading too much into it, but there's something inspiring here, as Abraham Lincoln is directly facing the back of George Washington. It's as if following in his footsteps. One led the country in its revolution and infancy, the other through its deadliest conflict, the Civil War. Don't get me wrong, it's not as if both of these men did not have their flaws, but both served and still do as a source of inspiration and legacy to follow. In the middle of them, in the middle of the park itself really, is the Independence Flagstaff, which was placed for the 150th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, which, by the way, you can read on the flagpole itself. On top, we have the coat of arms of the original 13 colonies. There, on the left, you have the New York one with the sun rising behind the mountains. On the floor, there are 48 states represented, not 50, as Alaska and Hawaii became states in 1959, so after this was created. Therefore, I felt this would be an appropriate place to begin our journey with the statue of Washington. But before we move on, one other interesting thing about this place, since Labor Day is coming up, a day to remember workers and their fight and struggle for better working conditions and wages, this exact spot was where thousands of workers came together to celebrate the first Labor Day in 1882. In front of the statue, not far away on the ground, there is a marker remembering that event. Okay, now let's walk down about 7 streets to Washington Square Park, named after, well, George Washington. The big portion of the current park was originally a potter's field or a public burial place, where unknown, extremely poor, slaves, and even victims of the yellow fever were buried here. And I think even executions were held here, if my memory serves me right. Therefore, right now, we are walking on land where thousands of people are buried. So essentially a park on top of a cemetery. I am a bit surprised that this history is not more underlined here in this park. Not that it's completely missing, because there are places which point this out, but you need to know where to look. What I'm talking about is maybe like a small monument somewhere or something like that. Again, I don't know currently the plans for this park or what is happening, but given that we are probably standing on many, many graves below us, it would be appropriate, I think. Anyway, by 1826, this was being used as a parade ground where soldiers would perform military exercises. And just a short time afterwards, in 1827, it became a public park. In the center, we have this cool fountain from the 1870s. And the main attraction of the park is the Washington Arch, which was created to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the inauguration of George Washington, and it dates back to the 1890s. Later, statues were added to the arch, as you see here on the left, George Washington as the commander-in-chief, a military general, while on the right, he stands as the President of the United States, a statesman, politician. When the American Revolution began, Washington actually had little experience leading large armies into battle. And during the Revolution, he lost more battles than he won. And yet, he proved capable. He went against the odds and not only came out victorious, but also with enormous respect and admiration from his soldiers and the general public. As the 13 colonies began their rebellion against their mother country, Britain, they needed to choose someone to lead men into battle. And George Washington was the one picked for a few reasons, but one of them was a simple fact that he was from Virginia. And already at this point, you saw a major divide in values and way of life between the colonies in the north and the colonies in the south, which were based on plantations and slavery. And so choosing someone from the north like New York or Boston would not be something that the representatives from the southern colonies would feel comfortable with. And so someone from Virginia had a better chance in uniting all of the 13 colonies together in their rebellion. The British had one of the best militaries in the world at that time, especially the Navy. And the 13 colonies, well, had almost nothing. And whatever they did have was in the beginning stages of being organized. For instance, when Washington first looked at the men he was to command, he did not see a professional army, but rather men who were poorly equipped, hungry, some of them drunk, lacked unity, discipline, or even morale. And yet, they did it. Once the revolution ended, a new country had to be created and glued together. Washington was really the only person everyone could agree on to be the president, and so in 1789 he became the first president of the United States, being sworn in here in New York City, and I will show you the exact spot. But along the way, we have to ask ourselves, where did Washington stay when he became the first president of the United States? Washington, D.C. was not built yet. And in fact, the first president to live in the White House was John Adams, the second president in the year 1800. And even by then, the White House was very much far from being completed. So let me show you the spot. But to get there, we need to walk below the Manhattan Bridge. Gorgeous bridge, but I feel like the Brooklyn Bridge next to it always gets the attention, leaving this one somewhat in the shadow. But I see it shaking those steel beams. We will cover this bridge at some point on this channel. Here we get to the end of Cherry Street, which in itself has pretty cool history, as this area was called Catherine's Slip, a wealthy neighborhood next to the water. Over the years, the island of Manhattan was extended more into the East River, and many of the rich merchant families that used to live here moved further up north as Manhattan was extending. And even though Cherry Street ends here, it used to continue all the way to Pearl Street. So let's go past these buildings and come out on the other side where we have the Brooklyn Bridge. So the first house where President George Washington lived in, here in New York City was on Cherry Street, the Samuel Osgood House, which Congress rented and in which Washington stayed from April 1789 to February 1790. So for about 10 months, this was the residence of the president, and New York City being the capital. So it was more on the corner of Pearl Street and Cherry, and so on the other side, here. The building was destroyed prior to the building of the Brooklyn Bridge, but here it is. This is the location of the home of the first president of the United States. In fact, on the Brooklyn Bridge itself, there is a plaque which states this. And I am pretty sure that many who pass by this street, even often, don't even see it because it's almost impossible to read from the street itself. However, very quickly, the home was simply too small, and George Washington moved to the Alexander Macomb House on 3941 Broadway Street, which was larger, and here Washington stayed for about 6 months. At which point, the capital was moved to the city of Philadelphia for a period of 10 years, as Washington, D.C. and the White House were being constructed, hence ending New York City's tenure as the capital of the United States. The house itself was demolished in 1940. However, nearby, right next to the New York Stock Exchange, we have the Federal Hall. Here, we also have a bronze statue of Washington. This building was completed in 1842. However, before it, another building used to stand here called City Hall, where the first Congress met and where George Washington was sworn in as the first president. Today, this place is operated by the National Park Service, just like other places in New York City, like, for example, Grant's Tomb, which I already did a video on. So let me show you a little bit on the inside. But by the way, just like with, let's say, many museums, you need to get proper permissions first in order to film inside, like I am doing. But you have a lot of cool stuff here, like even some information about John Peter Zenger, who was a newspaper editor who criticized the royal governor, someone who was appointed by the King of England to rule a colony, in this case, New York. He called the governor a thief and had other bad things to say about him, and for that he was arrested and put on trial. However, his lawyers argued that if what Zenger wrote was true, no matter how bad or nasty he made the governor to be, then he was innocent. At the end, the jury found Zenger innocent, so a case which was important in maintaining the freedom of press and speech. And you can see the wooden printing press. And in fact, if you walk into the rotunda on the left side, you have the balcony where George Washington stood as he was being sworn in as the president. That's cool. Here you have a section of the railing from the balcony preserved as well. But there is so much other cool stuff here, as even you have a replica of George Washington's presidential desk. Now, when it comes to homes and furniture, I really like modern, futuristic designs, but the historian in me is yelling, look at the places for your markers and notepads, erasers, and it's probably heavy enough for like 6 football players to struggle in picking it up, which is good. It's not gonna be wobbly. But look at this building and its details. It's gorgeous, it's beautiful. From the clock, to the Corinthian columns, to even the staircase banisters. Like I mentioned, this building was completed in 1842 and served as a customs house. So essentially merchants would dock their ships at New York Harbor and come here with lists of what goods they had on ships and how much of it. Tariffs, or taxes on imported goods, largely supported the functioning of the American government, along with taxes on alcohol and tobacco, because the income tax came much later. Therefore, a place like this, a custom house in New York City, played a very important role in the early functioning of the government. Then, from 1862 to 1925, it served as a sub-treasury building, so where bonds and coins were kept. And you can see 2 vaults here, so here's where goods would be kept during the days of this being a customs house, or money from the days of this being part of the treasury system. But again, there is a lot more to see here, and so I highly recommend visiting this place. And the staff is super nice and helpful, so you can always get your questions answered if you have any. So here was some places in the city that have historical significance and deal with George Washington, the first president. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you find these videos worthy, please subscribe, like them, spread the word. I appreciate all of your support. And stay safe out there till next time when I see you in another location here in the Big Apple.